Hi, my name is Brian Hartnett. I'm from Limerick, Ireland. I work in the area of mental health. Well-being is important to us all, and there is much debate about how to achieve it. I would like to talk a bit about it here in relation to hearing voices. This is what I believe based on my experience of 50 years on earth. You may not agree with me on everything. Some of what I say is contentious and may bring up strong feelings, but please bear with me to the end, as I believe my argument is a moderate one and it may help some people in the debate about well-being and voices. In order to explain where I'm coming from, I will have to tell you a bit about myself. I was born in Limerick in 1964 and I am the oldest of five. I was lucky enough to have two wonderful parents who gave us a good start in life with good plain simple food, plenty of exercise and in general a moderate attitude towards life. I was into art and music in particular, following in my father's footsteps. I became rebellious, however, as a teenager and began to challenge everything around me. I started drinking alcohol when I was 15 and became a bit of a party animal. I studied product design in art college in the first half of the 80s, and during that time I began to smoke marijuana. In 1988 I went to London and got into the whole acid house scene and started experimenting with hard drugs like ecstasy, speed, LSD and crack. I also used alcohol and marijuana more than ever. This affected my well-being adversely. I was physically, mentally and spiritually sick and was lucky to have Limerick to come back to recover in 1996. I had started hearing voices during this time. Ecstasy had given me a temporary feeling of being united to others around me, and it seemed to me that the voices were of a telepathic and spiritual nature. But what was often pleasant became at times very dark and frightening. I had rebelled against my Catholic religion as a teenager. The spirit of what I got into in London was very confused, reflecting the multiculturalism and variety of beliefs there. Through listening to reggae and jungle, my spirituality was now more about Rastafari and Obeah, or Caribbean and African religion. Even though I was back in Ireland, my voices reflected my time in London. I needed to find a balance between my time there and where I had grown up. My first involvement with the mental health system was when I was diagnosed with drug-induced schizophrenia on return from London. My dad had suggested we see a psychiatrist, and he based his diagnosis on what I told him about my voices. Even though I was predominantly tortured by them, I was functioning reasonably well, and I was not admitted to hospital. I did agree to try psychiatric medication as I hoped it would improve things with the voices. I was not entirely convinced that everything I was experiencing was because of a chemical imbalance in my brain, but the meds did help, reducing the level of the voices. The only side effect I had was drowsiness, which stopped being a problem after a while. I stayed on a medium dose of one medication for the next 10 years, tried two other types for 2 years, tried no medication for a year, and since then have been on what I started out with. Since I returned from London, my life has improved, although there have been ups and downs. I worked full-time in the mental health system as a peer advocate between 2003 and 2009. I started an organisation for people who hear voices in 2006, and since 2009 I have been lecturing in universities and working in different ways in the area of mental health. I believe we are made up of a body, a mind and a soul, or that we have a physical, psychological and spiritual life. I don't think anyone would argue about having a body and a mind, but I realise some people are not spiritual and don't believe we have a soul. But for the purpose of this debate, I am including it even if you can just say that there is a question in that area. So we have 3 points, or a triangle, illustrated by this diagram. It may seem like a simple, obvious diagram, but there is a lot in it to talk about. I have had problems with my well-being in my life, and it led me into the area of mental health in particular. If we consider that we see the triangle as representing our makeup, where do we see our emphasis as regards hearing voices, for example? I will see myself right in the middle, as I see the experience as being psychological, physical and spiritual. But not everyone sees it like that. I'm going to generalize here, obviously there are exceptions. Let's start with the body. Healthy eating and exercise are obviously important. I always feel better after a walk or a healthy meal. What about the brain and voice hearing? What is the attitude of your average psychiatrist, for example? They are most likely to argue that hearing voices is a delusion and a hallucination caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain as a result of having an illness, probably schizophrenia. They may consider there are psychological aspects to voice hearing, and if they are spiritual, they may consider that aspect. But their emphasis is predominantly to do with the body, so let's put them here on the triangle. Now what about the fast developing worldwide voice hearing movement, who argue that there is no such thing as schizophrenia, that voice hearing is a psychological issue, often due to trauma, perhaps in childhood, and that it is really an issue to do with the mind. Some of them may consider the spiritual aspect, but the dominant view is that it has nothing to do with the brain, and psychiatric drugs are unnecessary and do more harm than good. So let's put them here on the triangle. Now, what about the soul and spirituality? Most people who see voice hearing as a spiritual experience are religious. They may dismiss the idea that it has anything to do with a brain illness and see little value in a simple psychological explanation. So let's put them here on the triangle. I say I see myself in the middle, that I see my voice hearing as physical, spiritual and psychological. Am I just sitting on the fence, dodging the issues and trying to please everyone? No, I just don't subscribe completely to any one of the three extremes of the triangle, even though I sympathize at times with these extremes. Let me explain how my attitude towards my voices varies in emphasis between mind, body and soul. Let's take the spiritual first, which I predominantly lean towards. I initially saw my voices as coming from others around me or telepathic, but quite quickly it became spiritual until around 2010 when I became convinced that Jesus was guiding me and had been doing so all my life. It is the voice of Jesus I hear, and I regard myself as a Christian because that is the religion I was born into, and it came back to me. If I had been born into a different religion, I might hear a different voice. I believe that all religions have good in them except perhaps devil worship, and that there is only one God. When seeing my voices as spiritual, I believe people who have passed on talk to me, and that there is definitely an afterlife. I also believe I get messages from the living, and I also see this in spiritual terms, so I move into this direction on the triangle. If I was to drink heavily or use street drugs, which I don't, I would move towards a spiritual explanation as well. But then this way of doing things falls apart. The voices practically disappear, I no longer feel spiritual, and I lose my faith in it all. When this happens, I look in one direction or the other. The body, that is my brain, or the mind, that is my psychological state. Let's look to what the psychiatrists argue for. I take psychiatric medication because I find it helps to keep me grounded and I have a better relationship with my voices. I don't take it because anyone tells me to. I take it because before I started taking it and when I came off it for a year, my voices, or if you want to call it psychosis, was unmanageable. I was very unhappy and I wouldn't try it again. I am always happy to hear of people managing without meds or coming off successfully, but it doesn't work like that for me. Also, I personally know or have met hundreds of people who seem to be better off on meds than off. I see value in the concept of schizophrenia as being a split in the mind or a battle between in and out. In being the world of the mind and the soul, out being the physical world. When I am more out than in, I can see myself as having an illness which causes me to hear voices, so I head in this direction on the triangle. Finally, the mind. Psychiatrists turn me off psychiatry with their closed view of mental distress and embattled position on medication being the only answer. Also, the medicalisation of every human foible is a problem for me. I wish I didn't have to take meds when I hear all the negative statements about them. Also, I do believe that a lot of people are automatically put on medication when what they really need is to talk about trauma and their lives in general to a good listener. Psychological counselling can often be the answer. Despite my stable early life, London for me was partly traumatic, so it's arguable that my voices are as a result of that trauma, and there is nothing wrong with my brain, and that my spiritual experience is really just the workings of wishful thinking in my mind. So when I give up on the medical model and spirituality, I find myself pulled in this direction on the triangle. So ultimately, I find myself pulled in three directions in the debate, having sympathy for all three arguments, but ultimately I end up in the middle. So if you were like me, perhaps it's about time we got together and stood up and said, hey, wait a second, you're all right. And in the end, voice hearing, like well-being, is about the mind, the body, and the soul. So this is how I see things, but I am open to debate, and I try to include a variety of viewpoints on my website, www.voicesireland.com. Get in touch if you want.
From